Are seed oils really the worst thing you could possibly eat? Let's talk about that. How's it going, guys? My name's Richie Kerwin, and today we're going to talk about something that has kind of taken the nutrition world by storm, and that's the effects of seed oils on health. We'll talk about what seed oils actually are, how we get them in our diet, and we'll take a sensible look at the evidence of what they do to our health by looking at population studies and a lot of intervention studies. Now, unfortunately, I'm just not going to be able to deal with everything to do with seed oils in this video. There are lots of different claims about seed oils, and I don't have enough time to cover everything in a short YouTube video. So I'm going to focus on the most common or relevant health claims I hear about online. That said, we've included the titles of all the studies that we've referenced below in the description. Now, we've got a lot to cover, so buckle up because you're probably going to be surprised by some of the things you learn in this video. Let's get started. So, it's probably worth mentioning what exactly seed oils are. Funnily enough, seed oils are not just made from seeds. While some seed oils are made from seeds like sunflower seeds and rapeseed, a huge amount of seed oils are made from legumes like soybean oil and grains like corn oil. This means that seed oils are a very diverse group of products with a couple of things in common. One, they're all liquid at room temperature, unlike coconut oil, which is a solid. And two, they're actually very high in unsaturated fatty acids, especially polyunsaturated fatty acids, commonly called PUFAs. So what, you might ask? Well, if you spend any time on the internet these days, you're bound to hear that PUFAs, or seed oils, are not only the most toxic ingredient in the human food chain, but they're also the cause of all the health problems we have today, including obesity, heart disease, diabetes, and metabolic syndrome. Apparently. From what I've seen, most of the reasons people use to label seed oils as bad stems from two main research areas. The first is ecological observations. This means that people look at very rough trends in seed oil intake, see that it increased in the last few decades, and associate that with increases in obesity and related diseases that we see today. So, for example, we know that seed oils in the American diet have increased massively since around the 1960s, and animal fats like butter, lard, and tallow have decreased a lot since then. Some people say that this is evidence that seed oils are causing the obesity epidemic that started around the 1970s. However, we know that in research, correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation. That just means that you can't see two trends that occur at the same time and assume that one causes the other. So, even though people have been eating more seed oils since the 60s, and the obesity epidemic started around the 60s, we can't say that seed oils cause obesity. Interestingly, overall calorie intake in the 60s increased massively too. Could those extra calories in a world where people are becoming less and less active play a role in the world gaining weight? Now, besides the ecological observations being one of the reasons that some people claim seed oils are toxic, there is another area of research that people mention. By the way, if you ever hear someone talking about nutrition use the word toxic a lot to refer to a whole food group, there's a really good chance that they're talking pure BS. So, to help you understand what effect seed oils might have on human health, I'm going to use some data from properly adjusted epidemiological studies and intervention trials that focus on seed oils. We're going to look at their effects on obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and some other common lifestyle diseases. Let's start with obesity because we've already mentioned it. Now, according to some people, eating a lot of PUFAs or seed oils or vegetable oils leads people to gain weight regardless of calories. Now, considering we know calorie intake to be the ultimate driver of weight gain, that's a pretty big statement. Now, in terms of dietary trials with different amounts of saturated and unsaturated fat, the LAVAT study had a population of almost 850 participants in a care home and ran for over 8 years. The participants were split into two groups that both got 40% of their calories as fat. The control group had only 10 grams of linoleic acid, which is an omega-6 PUFA, and the experimental group had just over 40 grams of linoleic acid per day. The researchers saw massive increases in the amount of linoleic acid in the experimental group's body fat. But do you know how that affected their body fat overall? Well, there was no significant difference in body weight between the control and experimental groups at all. Either way, it looks like there isn't any scientific evidence to conclusively state that PUFAs increase appetite or weight gain. But obviously, mechanistic data isn't enough for us. So let's briefly look at the evidence for seed oil consumption and two major chronic lifestyle diseases, diabetes and insulin resistance, and heart disease. So what does some of the other evidence we have available today say about the effect of seed oils on the risk of heart disease? Let's start with a little mechanistic research. A recent review looked at the effects of soybean oil, which makes up over 50% of the oil that's used in the United States, and its effects on cardiovascular risk markers. It concluded that replacing saturated fat in the diet with soybean oil lowers LDL cholesterol levels. And if you've watched some of my other videos, you'll know that high LDL cholesterol, and specifically the apolipoprotein B particle that holds it all together, during early and midlife is a major risk factor for coronary heart disease. And keeping LDL cholesterol or ApoB levels low is one of the most effective ways to reduce your risk of heart disease. Another argument against seed oils is that PUFAs can be incorporated into LDL lipoproteins, leading to oxidized LDL, and oxidized LDL has been shown to potentially increase the risk of heart disease. Well, there are studies that have used PUFA-enriched diets, extracted the LDL, and then induced oxidation in vitro, or in test tube studies. And they've shown that PUFAs cause the LDL to be more susceptible to oxidation. That's definitely interesting, but it's an in vitro study, so we need to remember that. However, in a study that measured the level of oxidized LDL in vivo, or directly, in over 2,000 real-life humans, people who had higher intakes of PUFA, measured by looking at the level of PUFA in their blood, actually had lower levels of oxidized LDL, as well as lower levels of CRP. Remember, in nutrition science, studies that look at actual effects in humans are given much more weight than studies that just look at results from a test tube. Okay, so it seems that PUFAs aren't going to give you heart disease. Well, what about other major global health concerns like diabetes and its major symptom, insulin resistance? Let's look at some cohort studies that follow populations over years. One meta-analysis looked at 20 prospective cohort studies from 10 countries with almost 40,000 adults who didn't have diabetes at baseline. It found that higher proportions of linoleic acid in the blood and body fat were associated with a very significant lower risk of type 2 diabetes. Another meta-analysis looked at a total of 31 prospective cohort studies with almost 300,000 participants. It aimed to look at the association between dietary intakes of linoleic acid and blood and body fat levels of linoleic acid with the risk of type 2 diabetes. Compared with the lowest intakes of linoleic acid, the highest intakes of linoleic acid were associated with a small but significantly lower risk of type 2 diabetes. Another major meta-analysis of 102 trials with over 4,000 participants found that replacing saturated fats with PUFAs significantly lowered glucose, lowered HbA1c, and even lowered a measure of insulin resistance known as HOMA-IR. A sub-analysis of 10 trials showed that PUFA significantly improved insulin secretion too. So in this analysis, not only were there no negative effects of PUFAs, but they seemed to be beneficial. So there seems to be a pretty decent amount of evidence showing that seed oils or PUFAs are probably not directly responsible for causing type 2 diabetes, and in fact are probably a good option for reducing your risk. So, after all this evidence showing seed oils themselves don't seem to have some of the negative health effects that you hear about so much on social media, what about all those people that claim that their health has improved in leaps and bounds since they eliminated seed oils from their diet? They sound pretty convincing, right? Well, let's think about this logically. How do most people get seed oils in their diets? Do they walk around sipping on a mix of soybean oil and rapeseed oil from their water bottles? Are they pouring buckets of it over their salads? No. The number one source of seed oils in our modern diet is ultra-processed foods. These are foods that are usually made up of a combination of highly refined carbohydrates, especially sugars, and refined oils like palm, coconut, and seed oils, along with lots of other additives. Ultra-processed foods, or UPFs, have been incredibly well studied in the last decade and are associated with excess calorie intake, body fat gain, and a whole host of negative health effects like heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. Why? Well, ultra-processed foods, or UPFs, are cheap, available everywhere, very energy dense, meaning they have a lot of calories in a small portion size, hyper palatable, which is a fancy word for really freaking delicious, and easy to eat. They're also low in fiber and protein, which means that they don't make you feel full, and that means they're incredibly easy to overeat. Combined with the fact that ultra-processed foods are usually low in important nutrients like fiber, vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients, and a diet high in UPFs is usually low in whole foods, it's easy to understand why eating lots of ultra-processed foods is not good for your health. So, if someone wants to eliminate seed oils from their diet, the only way they can do it is by eliminating virtually all ultra-processed foods, and to be honest, that's most foods you find in the supermarket, as well as any commercially deep-fried foods. Making so many common foods off limits is a form of spontaneous calorie restriction, and it also forces you to focus your diet on more whole foods. So when someone says they've eliminated seed oils from their diet, they've likely also eliminated most processed foods from their diet, and they've likely replaced that with more unprocessed food. So of course that's going to result in weight loss and the associated improvements in health. But it's not just because they don't eat seed oils anymore. And don't forget, UPFs now make up to 60% of the calories that people eat in the United States and the UK. That's a massive chunk of calories. Now, what I'm going to say from here is the most important part of this video. How does this all apply to your diet? After all this science, am I saying that it's absolutely fine to eat as much seed oils in your diet as you want and it won't be a problem? Absolutely not. Anything in excess is not good for you. That's literally what excess means. If you consume too much seed oil, you're much more likely to gain excess body fat and suffer the health consequences. You see, seed oils fall into the category of added fats. Added fats are refined oils or fats which have been extracted from their whole food source, leaving a product that is pure fat, something that humans would never find in nature. In nature, fat will almost always come packaged with other nutrients, be it protein in animal foods or fiber in plant foods. Refining oils extracts and concentrates the fat into a product with very few other nutrients, and this includes animal fats like lard and tallow. They're just pure fat. Refined fats, similarly to refined sugar, just add more calories to food without providing much in the line of other nutrients. This is why reducing the amount of added fats and sugars in our diet is a good idea. So when I give recommendations for fat sources, I recommend getting the vast majority of your fats from whole food sources like oily fish, nuts and nut butters, seeds and avocados. This means that your fat will also come with other nutrients like protein, fiber, vitamins and minerals or phytonutrients. It's a much better deal than just adding pure fat or oil to your diet. If I do recommend oils, I tend to focus on including limited amounts of added fats for cooking and to help improve the flavor of other foods. In terms of what oils are suitable, simply based on the amount of research proving its health benefits, olive oil is a great choice. Good quality extra virgin olive oil is high in polyphenols and antioxidants such as vitamin E, which help to reduce the risk of oxidation too. On top of that, it tastes amazing. So, my personal choice to use olive oil is based on the evidence for positive health effects in its favor, and not because of any evidence of negative health effects of seed oils. And at the end of the day, it all comes down to personal choice. I just want your personal choice to be informed by correct information and not some lies made up to create an evil seed oil boogeyman that doesn't actually exist. Now, I realize this has been a long video, but I really hope that now you better understand the actual evidence related to seed oils and health. As always, if you have any more questions, let me know in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe to the Myprotein YouTube channel for more great evidence-based nutrition information.